So let's talk about South Sudan. It's the world's youngest nation, and it's standing at a really dangerous crossroads. It's supposed to be holding its first ever national elections, a real chance to finally move from decades of conflict to a functioning democracy. But the path to that election, it's completely blocked by the wreckage of a brutal civil war, a pile of broken promises, and a political system that's frankly on the verge of collapse. So the real question is, can a simple vote actually overcome a history that's been written with guns?
Okay, let's just pause on this quote for a second because Dr. Abraham Kool-Nuwan absolutely nails it. He gets right to the heart of the entire issue. See, the crisis in South Sudan isn't just one bad thing happening after another. It all stems from one single massive unresolved problem. How do you get power to change hands peacefully? Everything, the war, the humanitarian crisis, it all flows from this one critical failure.
So how did this one failure lead to such an absolute catastrophe? Well, to really get why this upcoming election is such a big deal and so risky, we got to take a quick look back at the country's incredibly turbulent first decade. It all started with so much hope and excitement back in 2011, but just 2 years later, a political fight between the president, Salva Kiir, and his vice president, Riek Machar, just completely boiled over. Kiir fires his entire cabinet, and that political rivalry exploded into a horrific 5-year civil war. A peace deal, it's got a long name, but everyone just calls it RCIS, was signed in 2018. That eventually led to a shaky unity government in 2020. But as you're about to see, this wasn't really a resolution. It was more like hitting the pause button. So what you end up with is a country that's just stuck. It's trapped in this awful no war, no peace limbo. The massive battles have mostly stopped, sure, but none of the things you need for actual lasting peace are in place. And the result? One of the worst humanitarian crises on the planet, with millions of people needing aid and a government that has, by and large, completely failed its own citizens. All right, so what about that peace agreement? The one that was supposed to fix everything? Well, if you look a little closer, it turns out the solution might actually be a huge part of the problem. Now, this is where it gets really telling. Just look at the pattern here. The one big piece of the peace deal that actually got implemented, even though it was late, was the power-sharing government. The part that carves up all the government jobs and positions for the political elites. But the foundational stuff, the things the country desperately needs, unifying the different armies, writing a constitution, creating justice for war crimes, it's all stalled, unfunded, or just hopelessly behind schedule. And this brings us to a really crucial idea, the elite pact. Think of it this way. A peace deal stops being a blueprint for building a real country, and instead it just becomes a temporary deal for the guys with guns to divide up the loot, the government jobs, the oil money, all of it. It doesn't solve the conflict. It just puts the rivalries on the government payroll. And this is why that election planned for 2026 is on such shaky ground. Because a system built on these kinds of elite pacts, instead of real reform, is a system that is fundamentally dangerously unprepared for a genuine democratic vote. Check out this number, 4%. According to observers on the ground, that's the tiny fraction of the requested budget that the National Elections Commission has actually received. I mean, think about that. You simply cannot prepare for a countrywide election on 4% of the money you need. It's being set up to fail from the very start. So if the money isn't going to the election, where is it going? Well, this chart tells you everything you need to know. A UN report found that between 2020 and 2024, the budget for the president's office just exploded. It overspent its allocation by almost 600%. Meanwhile, the health ministry, it got less than a fifth of its funding, and agriculture got a measly 7%. The money is there. It's just being funneled to political offices, not to public services or the basic building blocks of democracy. And here's the crucial point. This isn't about South Sudan being a poor country. It's not. It's rich in oil. The problem is systemic, massive-scale corruption. That same UN inquiry found that schemes like the Oil for Roads program were used to divert an estimated $2.2 billion into patronage networks. The nation's wealth is basically being treated like a private piggy bank. And this is the great, frustrating contradiction, because on paper, the laws are there. The National Elections Act clearly states that all parties should have equal and unrestricted access to state media. But what good is a law on paper when the very institutions needed to run a fair election are being deliberately starved of the funds they need to even function? So South Sudan's situation is dire. There's no question about it. But it's not totally unique. To really understand the stakes, we can look around the region and see some pretty stark warnings from its neighbors. It's like the country faces this triad of potential failure.
First, there's the Liberian risk. You hold an election, but it's just for show, a democratic paint job on a state that's still hollowed out by corruption. Then you've got the DRC risk. The election is just another backroom deal between elites, an engineered outcome that has no legitimacy and just kicks the can down the road. And then there's the one that is truly terrifying, the Sudanese risk. This is where the failure to ever unify the rival armies leads not just to a shaky government, but to a total collapse of the state, into another, even more devastating war.
So this is what it all comes down to. To finally break this devastating cycle, South Sudan's entire political culture has to change. It has to shift from a place where power is taken on the battlefield to a place where it is transferred through a ballot box. The big question, the one nobody knows the answer to, is whether its leaders have the will to actually forge that new path, or if the country is simply doomed to follow the tragic roadmaps we've already seen play out in the region.